The chamber doors sealed shut with a heavy metallic sound, and Ambassador Grace Linford knew before a single word was spoken that today would not end well. She stood at the center of the Galactic Council Hall, a vast circular room lit by cold blue light, surrounded by delegates from 43 worlds. None of them looked at her directly. That silence told her everything. High Counselor Vantor Kale rose from his seat, his long gray robes trailing behind him. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. The application of United Earth for full council membership has been reviewed, he said, and the vote stands at 31 against, 12 in favor. The petition is denied. Grace felt her chest tighten, but she kept her face calm. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, hoping it would never come. "May I ask the reason," she said, "given that Earth has met every technical and diplomatic requirement set by this council over the past 6 years?" Counselor Kale did not blink. "Requirements are not the issue, Ambassador. Humanity remains, in the council's judgment, developmentally unstable. Your species is young. Your history is marked by conflict. The council cannot risk galactic stability on a civilization still finding its footing." A murmur passed through the chamber, some delegates nodding in agreement, others staring at the floor, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to speak against the majority. Grace searched the room and found the one face that had always shown her something close to respect, Counselor Reska Dorn, a slender being from the outer ring worlds who had voted in favor every single time. Reska gave her the smallest shake of the head, a silent apology. Grace had grown used to rejection. This was the 4th time in 6 years that Earth's petition had been denied, each time with a different excuse, dressed up as concern. But something about today felt different. Perhaps it was the number, 31 against, the widest margin yet. Perhaps it was the tone, colder than before, as if the council no longer felt the need to soften its judgment with polite language. "With respect," Grace said, her voice steady despite the anger building underneath it. "Earth has provided navigation systems that keep half of council space connected. Earth scientists stabilized the relay network 3 cycles ago when your own engineers could not. Earth farmers grow the only crops that survive on 6 of your colony worlds. We have proven our value again and again, and still we are told we are not ready." Counselor Kale's expression did not change. "Value is not the same as readiness, Ambassador. A useful tool is not the same as a trusted partner. This council has made its decision. The session is closed." Grace stood alone as the delegates filed out, their conversations resuming as if nothing significant had happened, as if humanity's hope for a seat among the stars was simply another item checked off a long agenda. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply turned, walked out of the chamber, and boarded the transport back to the human embassy, her mind already racing toward the message she would have to send home. Millions of light years away, on Earth, President Nathan Hale sat in his office late at night, watching the broadcast feed from the council chamber. He had known the outcome before it was announced. Every advisor around him had predicted this result weeks in advance, and yet hearing the words spoken aloud still landed like a blow. He switched off the screen and sat in silence for a long moment. His chief science advisor, Dr. Claire Whitfield, stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the city lights below. She was the one who had personally led the team that repaired the council's failing relay network years earlier, work that had taken 18 months and cost dozens of Earth engineers their health from the strain. "They used our fix," she said quietly, "and then they called us unstable." Nathan rubbed his eyes. "How many systems still depend on us, Claire? Truthfully." She turned to face him. "More than they will ever admit. Our navigation arrays run through at least 11 major trade routes. Our agricultural exports keep 4 colony worlds from famine. Our engineers hold contracts on 4 different council stations because none of their own people can maintain the old systems we originally installed. If we walked away tomorrow, it would take them years to recover, if they ever fully did." Nathan was quiet for a long time. He thought of every ambassador Earth had sent to that chamber, every proposal rewritten to satisfy council concerns, every year spent proving a case that should never have needed proving. He thought about his own daughter, born the year the first petition was submitted, now old enough to ask her father why the people in the sky did not like humans. "We have spent 6 years asking for a seat at their table," he said finally. Maybe it's time we stopped asking. Claire studied him carefully. What are you saying? I'm saying we stop competing for their approval. We pull our people home. Our engineers, our scientists, our diplomats, all of it. We stop offering favors to a council that treats us like a problem to be managed, instead of a partner to be respected. Claire did not answer right away. The weight of what he was suggesting was enormous, a complete reversal of 6 years of careful diplomacy, and yet as she thought it through, she found herself nodding slowly. It would not be easy, she said. There would be consequences. Some worlds depend on us in ways they don't even realize. I know, Nathan said, but if we stay in this cycle, we will spend the next 60 years being told we are almost ready, almost trusted, almost enough. I would rather build something of our own than keep begging for permission to exist among people who have already made up their minds about us. Word of the decision did not reach the public immediately. Nathan spent the following days in closed meetings with his cabinet, laying out a plan that would take shape over the coming months, a plan to bring humanity's presence in council space to a quiet, deliberate end. It was not a declaration of hostility. There would be no ultimatums, no threats. Earth would simply, calmly, begin to withdraw. Grace Linford returned to Earth 3 days later, expecting to face criticism for failing to secure membership one more time. Instead, she was called into the president's office and told, in careful terms, that Earth's approach to the council was about to change entirely. She listened as Nathan explained his reasoning, and when he finished, she surprised him by nodding in agreement. I have sat in that chamber for 6 years, she said. I have watched delegates from worlds far younger than Earth get welcomed into the council within a decade of first contact, simply because they arrived with the right allies already vouching for them. We were never going to be judged fairly. Maybe it's time we accepted that and moved forward on our own terms. Across Earth's scattered colonies and stations throughout council territory, quiet instructions began to circulate. Engineers were told to prepare handover documents. Diplomats were told to begin winding down long-term agreements. Nothing was rushed, nothing was dramatic, but a shift had begun, one that very few outside a small circle of leadership yet understood. On a distant council station, orbiting a gas giant near the outer trade lanes, an engineer named Oliver Bennett received a message from Earth Command that made him pause over his morning meal. It contained only a few lines, instructing him to begin transferring his knowledge of the station's failing coolant systems to a local technician within the next 2 months, and to prepare for reassignment back to Earth. Oliver had spent 11 years on that station. He had personally kept its aging systems running through 3 near-catastrophic failures that the station's own engineers had been unable to solve. He read the message twice, unsure whether to feel relief or unease. Something was changing, something larger than his own small corner of the galaxy, and he did not yet know what it meant. Back on Earth, Nathan Hale stood before his cabinet one final time before the plan would become public. We are not leaving in anger, he told them. We are leaving with dignity. Let the council spend the next few years discovering exactly how much they relied on people they were never willing to call equals. Admiral Henry Voss, commander of Earth's home fleet, had not been present for the announcement, but he received the full briefing that evening in a secure room beneath the Capitol. He listened without interrupting as Nathan explained the scope of the plan, the timeline, the careful language that would be used to describe it publicly. When the president finished speaking, Henry leaned back in his chair and studied the star chart projected above the table. You understand what you are asking, Henry said. Our people are spread across dozens of stations, embedded in systems that have relied on us for years. Pulling them out cleanly, without incident, without leaving anyone stranded or unprotected, that is not a small operation. I know, Nathan said. That is why I need you to plan it properly. This is not a retreat, Henry. This is a controlled, deliberate withdrawal. Every person comes home safely. Every contract ends on our terms, not theirs. Henry nodded slowly, already running the logistics through his mind, the ships that would need to be redirected, the routes that would need to be secured, the quiet negotiations that would need to happen with station commanders who had spent years working side by side with Earth's people. It would take months to do right, but he agreed it needed to be done. Grace Linford, meanwhile, found herself unable to sleep that night. She sat by her window overlooking the Capitol, thinking back over 6 years of speeches, proposals, late-night negotiations, and the quiet exhaustion of trying to convince beings who had already decided humanity was not worth their trust. She thought of the young aide who had once told her, half joking, that Earth would probably be welcomed into the Council, right around the time the sun burned out. She thought too of the ordinary people who would be affected by this decision, families on distant colonies who had built lives around agreements with the Council, workers who took pride in keeping vital systems running for worlds far from home. This was not a decision made lightly, and she understood that better than anyone in that cabinet room. But she also understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that it was the right one. For 6 years, Earth had shaped its identity around a single question: are we good enough? It was time to stop asking. It was time to become something the Council had never expected, a civilization that did not need their approval to thrive. Nobody in that room could have predicted just how quickly and how painfully that discovery would come. The first ships began leaving Council space almost without notice. Oliver Bennett stood on the platform of the gas giant station, watching the transport that would carry him home for the first time in 11 years. He had spent the last 2 months training a local technician, a careful and eager young worker named Patrick Vaughn, in every detail of the coolant systems that kept the station alive. Patrick had learned quickly, but there was a nervousness in his eyes that Oliver recognized, the fear of someone who knew he was inheriting a responsibility he did not fully understand. "You have the manuals," Oliver told him one last time. "You have the backup protocols. If pressure drops below the marked line on panel 4, you shut down section 2 immediately, not later, immediately. Do not wait for a second warning." Patrick nodded, writing the instruction down even though he had heard it a dozen times before. "And if something happens that is not in the manual?" Oliver hesitated. He had faced exactly that situation twice in his 11 years on the station. Moments when the systems failed in ways no documentation had predicted. Moments that had required instinct built from over a decade of hands-on experience. "Then you will have to think fast," he said honestly, "and hope you think of the right thing." It was not the answer Patrick wanted, but it was the truth. Oliver boarded the transport an hour later, watching the station shrink behind him through the viewport, feeling a strange mixture of relief and guilt that he could not fully explain. Across dozens of other stations and colonies throughout Council territory, similar scenes played out that month. Engineers packed their belongings, diplomats closed embassy offices, agricultural specialists handed over seed banks and cultivation guides to local farmers who had never managed the delicate terraformed soil without human guidance. Earth's departure was quiet, professional, and almost invisible to the wider public, both on Earth and across the Council worlds. That was exactly how Nathan Hale wanted it. The Council, for its part, barely noticed at first. Councillor Vantor Kale received a brief report, noting that several human contractors had requested early termination of their service agreements, a matter he dismissed as routine turnover, nothing worth his attention. The Council had grown so accustomed to Earth's constant presence in the background of its operations that its sudden absence did not register as anything unusual, not yet. Councillor Reska Dorn was the first to sense that something larger was happening. She had maintained closer contact with Earth's diplomatic staff than most of her colleagues, and when she noticed that Ambassador Grace Linford had not responded to any communication in nearly 3 weeks, she grew concerned enough to request a formal inquiry. "The human embassy has gone quiet," she told the Council during a routine session. "Their ambassador has not attended a single meeting since the membership vote. Their scientific liaison office has stopped submitting reports. I believe we should reach out directly before this becomes a larger issue." Vantor Kale waved a hand dismissively. "Humans are known for their emotional reactions, Councillor Dorn. They were disappointed by the vote. They will return to their duties once the disappointment fades. It always does." Reska was not convinced, but she did not press the matter further that day. She had learned, over many years serving on the Council, that some of her colleagues preferred comfortable assumptions over uncomfortable investigation, and Vantor Kale was chief among them. Back on Earth, the withdrawal continued at a steady, deliberate pace. Nathan Hale addressed the public for the first time, 6 weeks after the process began, explaining in calm, measured terms that Earth would be redirecting its resources inward, focusing on the growth and protection of its own colonies, rather than continuing to seek membership in a council that had shown, time and again, that it did not consider humanity a true partner. The reaction across Earth was mixed. Some citizens felt a surge of pride, a sense that their leaders were finally standing up for a dignity that had been denied for far too long. Others worried about the economic and diplomatic consequences, unsure whether humanity was ready to stand entirely on its own. Nathan understood both reactions. He had wrestled with the same uncertainty himself in the quiet hours before making his final decision. Dr. Claire Whitfield led a separate effort during this period, one that received far less public attention than the diplomatic withdrawal, but would prove just as significant. She assembled a team of Earth's brightest engineers and scientists, many of them recently returned from Council territory, and tasked them with a single ambitious goal: building independent systems that would free Earth's colonies from any remaining reliance on Council infrastructure. "We spent years fixing their networks," she told her team during the first planning session. "Now we build our own, better, faster, and answerable to no one but ourselves." The work was demanding. Earth's scattered colonies needed new navigation arrays that did not depend on Council relay stations. They needed independent trade routes that bypassed Council-controlled space entirely where possible. They needed agricultural systems resilient enough to sustain growing populations without waiting on approval from a distant governing body that had never fully welcomed them. Claire's team worked around the clock, driven by a shared sense that they were building something historic, a foundation for a truly independent human civilization among the stars. Grace Linford, having formally closed the embassy on the Council's central station, returned to Earth to take on a new role, advising Nathan directly on how remaining human interests across the galaxy might be protected during the transition. It was strange, she reflected, no longer needing to walk into that cold blue chamber and defend her species before delegates who had already made up their minds. For the first time in years, she felt herself breathing easier. Not everyone within Council space was pleased by the change. On several colony worlds that had come to rely heavily on human-made technology and human-grown food, local leaders began sending anxious messages to Council headquarters, asking why their contracts with Earth suppliers had gone unanswered, why their maintenance requests were being redirected to inexperienced local technicians, why their agricultural advisors had suddenly and without full explanation returned home. One such message came from the administrator of a mid-sized colony called Halden Reach, a world whose entire food supply depended on crop strains developed by Earth scientists decades earlier, strains that had never been successfully replicated by any other species in the Council. The administrator, a careful and worried woman named Ilona Marsk, wrote directly to Councillor Kale, warning that without continued human support, the colony's next harvest cycle could fall dangerously short. Kale read the message with mild irritation rather than alarm. He forwarded it to a junior aide with instructions to draft a routine reassurance, explaining that Council agricultural specialists would review the matter in due course. He did not consider, even for a moment, that the matter might require urgency. Reska Dorn happened to see a copy of that message during a routine review of colony correspondence, and unlike her colleague, she read it with growing unease. She began quietly compiling a list of similar reports, messages from station administrators, colony leaders, and trade coordinators across Council territory, all describing the same pattern: human personnel departing, human-made systems left without adequate replacement, and a Council leadership too complacent to notice the scale of what was happening. She brought her findings to a private meeting with two other counselors she trusted, presenting a simple but troubling case. Earth was not merely disappointed. Earth was disengaging entirely, deliberately, and on a scale that could have serious consequences if left unaddressed. "We should send a formal delegation to Earth," she urged, not to apologize necessarily, but to understand exactly what is happening and how far it will go. Her colleagues were sympathetic but hesitant. Sending a delegation would mean admitting, publicly, that the Council had misjudged the situation, and pride within the chamber ran deep. They agreed to raise the matter at the next full session, but cautioned Reska against pushing too hard, too fast, warning her that Vantor Kale's influence over the Council remained strong, and that challenging his dismissive assessment openly could cost her standing among her peers. Reska left that meeting frustrated but not defeated. She began drafting her own report, gathering every piece of evidence she could find, preparing to present the full picture to the council, whether her colleagues wished to hear it or not. Meanwhile, on Earth, the pace of independent development accelerated. Claire Whitfield's team completed the first successful test of a fully independent navigation array, one that allowed a small fleet of transport ships to travel between 3 human colonies without ever passing through council-controlled relay points. It was a modest achievement in scale, but a massive one in symbolism, proof that humanity could move through the stars entirely on its own terms. Admiral Henry Voss expanded the reach of Earth's home fleet during this period as well, establishing new patrol routes that protected human shipping lanes without any reliance on Council security forces that had, in previous years, occasionally been slow to respond to threats against human vessels traveling through contested space. Earth was no longer asking for protection. It was providing its own. Nathan Hale watched these developments with quiet satisfaction, though he understood the work was far from finished. Independence could not be declared. It had to be built, piece by piece, system by system, and every small success brought Earth closer to a future where no council vote, however unjust, could hold power over its people again. Back within the council chamber, the cracks that Reska Dorn had begun documenting were only the beginning. Far more serious failures were already forming in systems that no one on the council had thought to question, systems that had quietly depended on human expertise for far longer than anyone realized. On Halden Reach, Ilona Marsk stood in the middle of her colony's central growing dome, watching a field of crops that looked healthy on the surface, but showed subtle signs of trouble to anyone who knew what to look for. The soil balance had shifted slightly over the past month, a change the local agricultural team, still learning from the notes left behind by departed human specialists, had not caught in time. It was a small imbalance, nothing catastrophic yet, but Ilona understood better than most how quickly small imbalances could become large disasters on a world with such a fragile growing environment. She had sent 3 messages to council headquarters requesting urgent assistance. She had received only a single automated reply promising review within a standard cycle, a timeline that felt dangerously slow given what she was seeing in her fields. She gathered her local team that evening and made a decision that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. "We reach out to Earth directly," she said. "Not through council channels, directly." Her advisors exchanged uneasy glances. Bypassing council communication protocols carried political risk, but Ilona had grown tired of waiting for a governing body that seemed unable or unwilling to act with any urgency. She drafted a personal message to Dr. Claire Whitfield, whose name she recognized from old agricultural research papers that had guided Halden Reach's original cultivation strategies, describing the soil imbalance in careful detail and asking, humbly, whether Earth might still be willing to offer guidance, despite the political tension between their peoples. Claire received the message 2 days later, and read it with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. She understood the science immediately. The imbalance Ilona described was treatable, but only if addressed within the next few weeks, before the growing cycle progressed too far to correct. She brought the message to Nathan Hale, uncertain how he would want her to respond given the broader strategy of withdrawal currently underway. Nathan considered the request carefully. "This is not a political matter," he finally said. "This is people who could go hungry, through no fault of their own. Send her what she needs, quietly, as a gesture of goodwill, not as evidence that we are willing to resume old arrangements." Claire compiled a detailed guide addressing the specific imbalance Ilona had described, along with an offer for a brief virtual consultation with one of Earth's agricultural specialists. She sent it directly, bypassing any council channel entirely, and within a week, Halden Reach's growing dome began to stabilize. Ilona was deeply grateful, and quietly troubled by what the exchange revealed, that her own council government had been ready to let her colony suffer through simple bureaucratic delay, while Earth, a civilization the council had just rejected, responded within days out of what appeared to be simple decency. She did not report the exchange to council headquarters. She suspected, correctly, that doing so would only create further complications, and for now, she was far more concerned with keeping her people fed than with satisfying council protocol. Word of the quiet exchange never reached Vantor Kale. But similar stories were beginning to accumulate across dozens of colonies and stations throughout Council space, each one small on its own, each one a sign of a much larger pattern that the Council leadership continued to overlook. Reska Dorn's collection of reports grew heavier by the week, and her sense of urgency grew along with it. Back on Earth, Patrick Vaughn, still adjusting to his new responsibilities on the gas giant station once maintained by Oliver Bennett, faced his first real test 3 months into his new role. A pressure fluctuation in Section 2 crept slowly upward over the course of a single shift, subtle enough that the station's automated systems failed to flag it as an emergency. Patrick noticed the irregularity during a routine check, and for a long, frightening moment, he found himself staring at readings that did not match anything in his training manuals. He thought of Oliver's final warning: if something happens that is not in the manual, you will have to think fast, and hope you think of the right thing. He ran through every scenario he had been trained on, comparing patterns, searching for anything close to what he was witnessing. Eventually, he made the call to shut down Section 2 early, following the underlying principle Oliver had drilled into him, even though the exact numbers did not match any documented threshold. It was the right decision. A full inspection later revealed a slow leak in an aging valve, one that would have caused a serious failure within hours had it gone unaddressed. Patrick reported the incident to Council Engineering Command, expecting recognition for catching the problem in time. Instead, he received a brief, unremarkable acknowledgement, filed away among a growing pile of similar incident reports that no one at Council headquarters seemed to be reading closely enough to notice the pattern forming beneath them. A full year passed before the silence the Council had grown so comfortable with finally broke apart. It began, as these things often do, with a single failure that no one expected to matter as much as it did. The Central Relay Network, the vast web of communication and navigation nodes that connected every major system in Council space, had been designed and stabilized decades earlier by a team of Earth physicists during what many now remembered as the golden era of cooperation between humans and the Council. That network had run smoothly for years, quietly maintained by a rotating handful of human engineers who understood its architecture better than anyone else in the galaxy. Those engineers were gone now, recalled home along with nearly every other human specialist across Council territory. Local technicians had taken over maintenance duties, following documentation left behind, performing routine checks according to schedules set years earlier. But the relay network was not a simple system. It had been built with elegant, layered solutions that only made sense to those who understood the underlying physics from the ground up, and the technicians now responsible for it had never been trained to that depth. They maintained it the way someone might maintain a machine, without fully understanding why it worked. Careful, diligent, but ultimately limited by the boundaries of their own knowledge. The first sign of trouble appeared on a routine diagnostic report from Node 7, a critical junction point connecting the outer trade lanes to the central Council systems. A junior technician named Pharaoh Delk noticed a slight irregularity in the node's power distribution. Nothing alarming at first glance, well within the tolerances outlined in his training documentation. He logged the reading and moved on to his next task, unaware that the irregularity was, in fact, an early symptom of a much deeper structural weakness that the original Earth engineers had known to watch for closely. A weakness that had never been fully explained in the documentation because it had simply never needed explaining while those engineers remained on duty. Over the following weeks, similar minor irregularities appeared at 3 other nodes across the network. Each one, viewed in isolation, seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern that any of Earth's original engineers would have recognized instantly. A cascading imbalance building slowly across the entire system. The kind of problem that required intervention long before it became visible in any single node's individual readings. No one on the Council's current engineering staff recognized the pattern. Reports were filed, reviewed briefly, and set aside as routine maintenance matters. The Council's engineering command, already stretched thin trying to cover responsibilities once shared with human specialists, simply did not have the depth of expertise remaining to see the danger building beneath their notice. Reska Dorn, still tracking reports from across Council territory, noticed the pattern before anyone in engineering command did, though her expertise lay in diplomacy rather than physics. She brought her concerns to a senior Council engineer named Doss Carnell, a capable but overworked official who had inherited responsibility for systems far beyond what his original training had prepared him for. "These readings from Node 7 and Node 12, she said, spreading the reports across his desk. "Do they concern you at all?" Carnell studied them carefully, his brow furrowing. "They are within acceptable tolerances," he said, though his voice carried less confidence than his words suggested. "Though I admit, I do not fully understand why these particular tolerances were set where they were. The original documentation references calculations that predate my time in this position. Can you find someone who does understand them?" Carnell was quiet for a long moment. "The engineers who built this system," he finally admitted, "were human. All of them. We have not had a human engineer on staff in over a year." The admission hung heavily in the room. Reska had suspected as much, but hearing it, confirmed so plainly by the Council's own engineering leadership, sharpened her sense of urgency into something close to alarm. She left Carnell's office and went directly to Councillor Kale's chambers, determined to force the issue that she had been quietly raising for months without success. Kale listened to her report with visible impatience. "You are asking me to believe that the entire relay network, a system this council has operated successfully for years, is at risk of failure simply because the humans who once maintained it have gone home? I am asking you to consider the possibility," Reska said, "before it becomes something we can no longer ignore." Kale waved the concern aside, as he had waved aside every warning before it. "Councillor Dorn, I understand your fondness for the humans, but I will not authorize an emergency review based on speculation. If the engineering command believes the readings fall within acceptable limits, then they fall within acceptable limits. Bring me evidence of an actual failure, and then we will talk." Reska left the meeting with a growing sense of dread. She did not have to wait long for the evidence Kale demanded. 3 weeks later, Node 7 failed catastrophically during a routine load increase, a surge that the node's original design had been built to absorb easily, had the layered stabilization system still been functioning as intended. Instead, the imbalance that had been building quietly for months reached a breaking point, and the failure cascaded outward through the network, faster than anyone could respond. Communication across a dozen systems went dark within minutes. Navigation arrays that depended on the relay network for precise positioning began returning corrupted data, forcing ships throughout Council space to drop out of their planned routes and hold position, uncertain whether it was safe to proceed. Trade convoys stalled mid-journey. Colony administrators lost contact with Council headquarters entirely, unable to request assistance or even confirm whether the outage was localized or galaxy-wide. On Halden Reach, Ilona Marsk watched her communication terminal flicker and die mid-message, cutting off contact with the rest of Council space entirely. She stared at the dark screen for a long moment, remembering the quiet efficiency with which Earth had responded to her request for help the previous year, and felt a cold certainty settle in her chest that this outage was connected to exactly the kind of neglect she had feared all along. At Council headquarters, panic spread quickly through the engineering command center. Dos Carnell worked through the night alongside his exhausted team, attempting to trace the source of the cascading failure, using documentation that grew less useful with every layer of the problem they uncovered. By morning, they had identified Node 7 as the origin point, but understanding why the failure had occurred and how to safely restore the network without triggering further collapses elsewhere remained far beyond their current expertise. Councillor Kale called an emergency session of the full council, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by a barely concealed panic that many of his colleagues had never seen from him before. "We require an immediate assessment," he announced. "Every available engineer, every resource this council possesses, must be directed toward restoring the relay network before this crisis spreads further." Reska Dorn rose slowly from her seat, and for the first time in a very long while, the chamber fell completely silent to hear what she had to say. "Every available engineer," she repeated. "Councillor Kale, our available engineers do not understand this system. They never did. The people who understood it, the people who built it, are the very same people this council spent 6 years telling that they were not good enough to sit among us." The words landed hard across the chamber. Some delegates looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared at Kale, waiting for his response. He had none, not immediately, and the silence stretched long enough that everyone present understood exactly what it meant. Dos Carnell's team worked for 3 more days, attempting every solution their limited understanding could produce. And each attempt only seemed to reveal how much deeper the problem ran than they had first believed. By the fourth day, 3 additional nodes had begun showing the same early warning signs that had preceded Node 7's collapse, and Carnell was forced to report to the Council that without a far more complete understanding of the network's original architecture, a second, potentially larger failure was not just possible, but increasingly likely. The council chamber that convened that evening was unlike any session Reska Dorn had witnessed in her many years of service. Delegates who had once dismissed her warnings now leaned forward, listening intently as she laid out, once again, the pattern she had been tracking for over a year, the departure of human personnel, the quiet failures accumulating across dozens of systems, the fragile crop yields on colonies like Halden Reach, all pointing toward the same uncomfortable truth. Humanity had not simply been useful. Humanity had been holding together far more of Council civilization than anyone had been willing to admit. "We have a choice," Reska said, addressing the full chamber directly. "We can continue to insist on our own pride and watch this network collapse entirely, taking trade, communication, and colony stability down with it. Or we can acknowledge, honestly and without further delay, that we need the very people this council turned away." Vantor Kale sat motionless for a long moment, the weight of the chamber's attention resting heavily upon him. He had spent 6 years shaping the council's position on humanity's unreadiness, and admitting the depth of the current crisis meant admitting that his judgment, and the judgment of everyone who had voted alongside him, had been catastrophically wrong. "What are you proposing, Councillor Dorn?" he finally asked, his voice quieter than the chamber had ever heard it. "I am proposing," Reska said, "that we send an envoy to Earth, not with demands, not with conditions, with an honest request for help and an honest offer of the membership this council should have granted years ago." The vote that followed was not unanimous. Pride still ran deep among several delegates who resisted admitting fault so openly, but it passed by a wide enough margin to move forward. Vantor Kale, humbled in a way he had never expected to be, agreed to lead the process personally, understanding that the council's credibility, and perhaps its very stability, now depended on how quickly and sincerely it could repair the relationship it had so carelessly discarded. Word was sent to Earth requesting an urgent diplomatic channel be reopened. The message that arrived in Nathan Hale's office that evening carried a tone unlike anything Earth had received from the Council in 6 long years. Not authority, not judgment, but something closer to desperation. Nathan read the message twice, before calling Claire Whitfield and Grace Linford into his office. "They are asking for help," he said simply, sliding the message across his desk. "The relay network is failing, and they finally understand why." Grace studied the message carefully, remembering every cold dismissal she had endured in that chamber, every excuse, dressed up as concern. "What do we tell them?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, weighing a decision that would shape humanity's relationship with the wider galaxy for generations to come. "We tell them," he said finally, "that we will consider it, but we do not rush back into their arms, simply because they finally need something from us." Claire Whitfield had been anticipating this moment for months, ever since the first reports of irregular readings on the relay network had reached her through old contacts still monitoring council communications from a distance. She had suspected the network's slow decline long before anyone in the council chamber understood it, and she had quietly prepared a full technical assessment in case Earth's help was ever formally requested. "I can have my team ready an analysis within a day," she told Nathan. "If we decide to respond, I want them to understand exactly how serious this is. Not just the network, but everything connected to it. Colony life support systems on at least 6 worlds route through those same relay nodes. If the cascading failures reach that point, this stops being an inconvenience and becomes a matter of lives." Nathan absorbed the weight of her words. He had built his presidency around a message of dignity and self-reliance, and he was not willing to abandon that message simply because the council now found itself desperate. But he was also not willing to let innocent people on distant colonies suffer because of a leadership failure that was not their fault. Admiral Henry Voss joined the conversation shortly after, having been briefed on the situation by Secure Channel. "If this is truly a life support risk," he said, "we cannot afford to let politics slow us down too long. But we also cannot let the Council believe that a crisis is all it takes to erase 6 years of dismissiveness. There has to be a middle path. Grace Linford, who understood the psychology of the Council chamber better than anyone else in the room, offered the framework that would eventually shape Earth's response. "We send a technical team," she said. "Not a full diplomatic delegation. Not yet. We help them stabilize the immediate danger to protect the colonies at risk. But we make clear that any long-term partnership depends on terms Earth sets this time, not terms dictated by a council that only respects us when their own systems are failing." Nathan considered the proposal carefully, weighing every angle. It was a delicate balance, offering enough help to prevent real harm to innocent people, while refusing to simply slide back into the same subordinate relationship Earth had spent the past year working so hard to leave behind. Finally, he nodded. "Draft the response," he told Grace. "We help stabilize the network, for the sake of the colonies at risk. But we send our own people, on our own terms, and we make clear that this is not a resumption of old arrangements. If the Council wants a lasting partnership after this, they will need to earn it properly this time." The message that left Earth that night was carefully worded, professional, sympathetic to the human cost of the crisis, but unmistakably firm. It offered immediate technical assistance to prevent life support failures on the affected colonies, led by a small team under Claire Whitfield's direction, while explicitly declining to reopen full diplomatic relations until further discussions could take place on entirely new terms. When the message reached Council headquarters, Vantor Kale read it in silence, his pride wrestling visibly with his relief. Reska Dorn, watching him carefully, spoke before he could voice any objection. "This is more than we deserve, Councillor Kale, and far more generous than the reception we gave their ambassador in that very chamber. I suggest we accept graciously, and reflect carefully on how we arrived at needing to ask." Kale said nothing for a long moment, then finally nodded, the closest thing to an admission of fault that his pride would allow. Word was sent back to Earth accepting the offer, and within 3 days, a small transport carrying Claire Whitfield and a team of 6 engineers departed for Council Central Command. Their mission narrow in scope, but enormous in significance. The first human presence to formally return to Council space since the withdrawal had begun. The colonies affected by the outage watched the days pass with growing anxiety. On Halden Reach, Ilona Marsk received word that help was finally on its way, though not from the Council directly, and not in the form she had expected. She found herself feeling something complicated, gratitude toward Earth, and a quiet, simmering frustration toward the Council leadership that had left her colony to suffer in silence for so long, while human engineers, the very people capable of solving the crisis quickly, sat idle back on their own world, simply because pride had kept both sides from speaking honestly with one another for far too long. As Claire's transport approached Council Central Command, she looked out at the same stars she had once traveled among during the years she spent fixing Council infrastructure, without ever receiving true recognition for the sacrifice it required. This time, she told herself, would be different. This time, Earth was not arriving to prove its worth. It was arriving because it chose to, and that distinction, small as it seemed, changed everything about what would come next. The docking bay, at Council Central Command, was quieter than Claire Whitfield remembered. She stepped off the transport with her team close behind her, half expecting the same cold formality that had greeted every human visitor for the past 6 years. Instead, she found Reska Dorn waiting personally at the platform, a gesture of respect that surprised her. "Thank you for coming," Reska said, extending a hand in the human custom she had learned years earlier during more hopeful times. "I know Earth had every reason to refuse." Claire shook her hand, studying the counselor carefully. "We did not come for the Council," she said honestly. "We came for the people on the colonies who never had a say in the decisions that put them at risk." Reska nodded, accepting the distinction without argument. "Understood. Dos Carnell and his team are waiting in the Engineering Command Center. They have been working around the clock, but I think you will find the situation has grown worse since our last full report." Claire's team moved quickly through the station, and within an hour she was standing before the same diagnostic displays that Carnell's overwhelmed engineers had been staring at for days, searching for answers buried in a system whose deepest logic had never been fully documented. Claire recognized the readings immediately, the same cascading imbalance she had once diagnosed and corrected during her original work on the network years earlier, now compounded by months of neglect and incomplete repairs. "This is fixable," she told Carnell, "but not with patchwork solutions. The layered stabilization matrix needs to be rebuilt from its core logic outward, not just patched at the surface level, where the symptoms happen to show up first." Carnell looked both relieved and exhausted. "We attempted exactly that approach 3 days ago, and triggered a secondary fluctuation at node 12. I feared any further attempt might cause more harm than good." Claire studied the failed attempt logs carefully, understanding immediately where the mistake had occurred, a sequencing error that any of the original design team would have recognized instantly, but that made perfect sense as an oversight for someone encountering the system's true complexity for the first time. "You were close," she said. "The order of operations needs to be reversed. Stabilize the secondary support nodes first, then address the core imbalance at node 7. Attempting it in the wrong order is what caused the fluctuation." Over the following 2 days, Claire's team worked alongside Carnell's engineers, not replacing them, but teaching them, walking through every step of the repair process with careful, patient explanation that had never been offered during the original installation, years earlier, when time pressures and political sensitivities had led human engineers to simply complete the work quickly rather than train local staff thoroughly. This time, Claire insisted on doing it differently. "If we fix this without teaching you how it truly works," she told the exhausted engineering team gathered around her, "we will simply be back here again, in another decade, watching the same crisis repeat itself. I would rather spend 2 extra days making sure you understand the why behind every step, not just the what." Doss Carnell found himself deeply moved by the offer, an offer that came without demand for payment, without political leverage, freely given, despite everything the Council had put Earth through. "Why help us this thoroughly?" he asked Claire quietly during a break in the work, after everything that was said in that chamber. Claire considered the question carefully before answering. "Because the people on Halden Reach and a dozen other colonies did not vote against our membership. They are not responsible for the pride of a few counselors who could not see past their own assumptions. I am not here to reward the Council's leadership. I am here because innocent people are at risk, and Earth does not abandon people simply because the politics around them turned complicated." By the end of the 3rd day, the relay network stabilized fully, for the first time in weeks. Communication across the affected systems returned to normal. Navigation arrays began providing accurate positioning data once more. On Halden Reach, Ilona Marsk watched her communication terminal flicker back to life, with a relief so profound she found herself briefly unable to speak. The growing crisis that had threatened her colony's stability finally resolved, not through Council leadership, but through the quiet, determined work of the very people her governing body had spent years dismissing. Vantor Kale requested a formal meeting with Claire Whitfield before her team's scheduled departure, arriving with none of the cold authority he had carried during the original membership vote. He looked, for perhaps the first time in his long career, genuinely uncertain of himself. "The Council owes Earth a debt it cannot easily repay," he began, choosing his words with visible care. "I understand now, more clearly than I wish I did, exactly how much this Council relied on capabilities we were too proud to properly value." Claire listened without interrupting, letting him continue. "I would like to formally propose reopening membership discussions," Kale continued, "on whatever terms Earth considers fair. I believe, after everything that has happened, the Council would support full and unconditional membership without the delays and conditions of the past." Claire studied him for a long moment before responding. "That decision is not mine to make, Councillor Kale. I came here to fix a network, not to negotiate Earth's future. But I will carry your proposal back to President Hale, exactly as you have presented it." Kale nodded, understanding the distinction, and for the first time in 6 years, a genuine, uncalculated respect passed between a human representative and the highest authority of the Galactic Council. Claire's transport departed Council Central Command 3 days later, carrying with it not just her exhausted but satisfied engineering team, but also a formal, sincere offer of membership, drafted personally by Vantor Kale and endorsed unanimously by a council chamber that had finally, painfully, learned the true cost of its earlier arrogance. When Claire arrived back on Earth and delivered the offer to Nathan Hale, she watched him read it slowly, twice, the same careful attention he had given to every message throughout this long and complicated year. He set the offer down on his desk and looked up at her, at Grace Linford standing quietly beside her, at Admiral Henry Voss, who had joined the meeting upon hearing of Claire's return. "They are offering us everything we asked for 6 years ago," Nathan said slowly. "Full membership, no conditions, no further review, no further judgment." Grace felt a strange mixture of vindication and hesitation settle over her. This was the outcome she had once dreamed of during countless sleepless nights in that cold blue chamber, the outcome she had fought for across 6 years of careful diplomacy that had ultimately failed. And yet, standing here now, having watched Earth build something entirely its own over the past year, she found herself uncertain whether that old dream still fit the civilization Earth had become. "What do we tell them?" she asked quietly, "now that we finally have what we once wanted so badly?" Nathan did not answer immediately. He walked to the window overlooking a capital that had grown more self-assured over the past year, more confident in its own capabilities, less defined by the approval of others than it had ever been before. He thought of Oliver Bennett, home now and thriving in Earth's expanding engineering programs. He thought of Patrick Vaughn, still tending the gas giant station with skills he had earned through hard experience rather than desperate validation. He thought of Ilona Marsk, whose gratitude had come not from council leadership, but from Earth's own quiet decency. "We do not answer right away," Nathan finally said. "We take the time to consider this properly, on our own schedule, exactly as they should have done for us 6 years ago. Let them wait, the way we once waited, and let us decide, honestly and carefully, whether their table is still one we wish to sit at." Admiral Henry Voss found himself nodding slowly at the president's words. He had spent the past year building something he had never expected to feel so proud of: an independent fleet, answerable only to Earth, patrol routes that protected human interests without ever needing council permission or council escort. The idea of folding that hard-won independence back into a council structure, even one now offering full and equal partnership, sat uneasily with him. "There is also a practical matter to consider," Henry said. "Our fleet, our trade routes, our navigation systems, all of it now runs independently of council infrastructure. If we accept membership, do we integrate those systems back into theirs, or do we remain separate, cooperating, where it benefits both sides, but maintaining our own foundation? That decision matters as much as the political question." Claire Whitfield had already been considering the same question during her long journey home. "I would advocate for keeping our systems independent," she said. "Membership does not have to mean dependence again. We can be equal partners who happen to run our own infrastructure, sharing knowledge and resources where it helps everyone, without ever again finding ourselves in a position where our absence could cripple an entire network, because no one else understood how it worked." Nathan considered this carefully, turning the shape of a new kind of relationship over in his mind, one built not on hierarchy, but on mutual respect between equals who each maintained their own strength. It was a far more complicated vision than either the total isolation Earth had pursued over the past year, or the desperate pursuit of approval that had defined the 6 years before that. But it felt, to him, like the only version of membership worth accepting. "Draft a response," he told Grace. "Tell them we are considering their offer seriously. Tell them that if Earth does rejoin the Council, it will be as a fully independent partner, maintaining our own infrastructure, our own fleet, our own agricultural and scientific systems, contributing to Council prosperity by choice rather than necessity. Tell them we will need time, and that this time, the waiting will be on their terms of patience rather than ours." Grace began drafting the message that evening, feeling a satisfaction she had not expected after 6 long years of frustration in that cold chamber. This was not the desperate plea for validation she had once carried into countless council sessions. This was Earth, calm and certain, stating its own terms to a council that had finally learned, through hard and painful experience, exactly what it had once taken for granted. Word of the council's offer eventually reached the broader public, both on Earth and across council territory, and reactions varied widely. Some Earth citizens felt a surge of pride at the vindication. proof that walking away had ultimately earned the respect that 6 years of patient diplomacy never could. Others expressed caution, worried that rejoining the council too quickly might undo the hard-won independence Earth had built over the past difficult year. Nathan understood both perspectives, and he made clear in every public statement that no final decision would be rushed. Across council space, the reaction was more complicated still. Many delegates who had voted against Earth's membership years earlier now found themselves publicly reflecting on their earlier judgment, some with genuine humility, others with more calculated political repositioning as they sensed which way the wind was now blowing. Reska Dorn, who had fought for years to be heard on this very issue, found herself finally receiving the recognition she had long deserved, though she took little satisfaction in it, understanding that the cost of the council's earlier arrogance had fallen hardest on ordinary people across dozens of colonies who had never asked to be caught in the middle of a political standoff. On Halden Reach, Ilona Marsk followed the unfolding negotiations closely, hoping quietly that whatever agreement emerged would ensure her colony, and others like it, would never again be left vulnerable to the kind of institutional neglect that had nearly cost them their food supply. She had grown to trust Earth's quiet reliability far more than she trusted the Council's formal promises, and she hoped that trust would be reflected in whatever new relationship finally took shape. Patrick Vaughn, still maintaining the gas giant station he had once inherited from Oliver Bennett with such uncertainty, found himself reflecting on how much he had grown over the past year, forced by circumstance to develop a depth of understanding he might never have gained had human engineers remained permanently in place. He hoped that whatever new arrangement emerged between Earth and the Council would preserve that hard-won independence, allowing local technicians like himself to continue growing in expertise, rather than simply returning to dependence on human specialists for every difficult problem. As the weeks passed and negotiations continued quietly between Earth's leadership and Council representatives, it became clear that this would not be a simple return to old arrangements. Both sides were being forced, for the first time in their long and complicated history, to negotiate as genuine equals, each bringing something the other needed, each finally recognizing what true partnership required. 6 months after the relay network crisis, a council envoy arrived on Earth for the first time in the planet's history. The envoy, a thoughtful and unusually humble delegate named Doran Selk, had been chosen specifically for the mission because of his reputation for genuine listening rather than political maneuvering, a quality the council leadership hoped might help repair a relationship still delicate despite months of careful negotiation. Doran was greeted at the capital not with hostility, but with a kind of careful, measured hospitality that told him immediately Earth had changed in ways the Council had not fully anticipated. Nathan Hale met him personally, along with Grace Linford, Claire Whitfield, and Admiral Henry Voss, a leadership team that projected quiet confidence rather than eagerness. "I have come," Doran said, standing before them in a modest conference room rather than the grand chamber he had expected, "to understand, honestly, what Earth requires for this partnership to succeed, not what the Council assumes you require, but what you yourselves have decided you need." Nathan appreciated the directness. "We require respect," he said simply, "not gratitude for services rendered during a crisis, not conditional approval based on how useful we prove ourselves to be, but genuine respect for what Earth has built, both before this past year and especially during it. We are not the same civilization that petitioned your council 6 years ago, hoping desperately for a seat at your table. We built our own table. If we join yours, it will be because we choose to bring our table alongside it, not because we need a seat we were once denied." Doran listened carefully, taking notes, asking thoughtful questions about the independent systems Earth had developed, the navigation arrays, the agricultural networks, the fleet patrol routes that no longer depended on Council coordination. He seemed genuinely fascinated rather than threatened by what he learned, and Grace found herself, for the first time in years of dealing with Council representatives, feeling something close to optimism about a diplomatic relationship. Over the following weeks, Doran Selk toured several of Earth's key facilities, meeting engineers and scientists who had once served across Council territory, and now applied that same expertise toward Earth's own growing infrastructure. He met Claire Whitfield's expanded research team, now developing navigation technology more advanced than anything currently used within council space. He toured agricultural facilities where crop scientists had refined the very techniques that had once saved colonies like Halden Reach, techniques now being shared freely with any world willing to build genuine partnership rather than simple dependence. He also met Oliver Bennett, who had transitioned from his years of station maintenance into a leadership role training the next generation of Earth engineers. Oliver spoke candidly about his years on the gas giant station, the isolation, the quiet pride of keeping vital systems running for people who rarely acknowledged the effort involved, and the strange mixture of relief and uncertainty he had felt when finally called home. "I do not regret those years," Oliver told Doran during their conversation, "but I do not wish that same experience on the engineers coming after me. If Earth rejoins the Council, I hope it is as partners who value each other honestly, not as a convenient solution to problems no one else wants to solve." Doran carried these conversations back to Council headquarters, with a report far more detailed and honest than any his predecessors had delivered during the original membership evaluations years earlier. He described not a young, unstable civilization in need of careful oversight, but a mature, self-sufficient people who had built remarkable independence in the span of a single difficult year, driven by a painful but clarifying rejection. The full council convened to review Doran's report, and this time, the discussion unfolded very differently than it had 6 years and one crisis earlier. Vantor Kale, still carrying the weight of his earlier misjudgment, spoke first, choosing his words with visible humility. "I was wrong," he said simply, addressing the full chamber. "Wrong about humanity's readiness. Wrong about the value of patience over recognition. Wrong to dismiss warnings that, in hindsight, were painfully clear. I do not say this to seek forgiveness. I say this because this council must understand exactly what our earlier arrogance cost us, and exactly what continued arrogance might cost us again if we do not approach this partnership honestly." Reska Dorn rose next, her voice steady after years of advocating for a relationship the council had so nearly destroyed through its own pride. "Earth does not need our approval anymore," she said. "That is the truth this chamber must accept before any vote proceeds. If we offer membership now, it must be because we genuinely value what Earth brings to this council, not because we fear another crisis, and not because we hope to reclaim the convenient dependence we once enjoyed without ever properly compensating for it." The vote that followed passed with a margin far wider than the original rejection had carried 6 years earlier, though this time the vote was not simply for membership, but for a new framework entirely, one built on genuine partnership between independent, equal civilizations rather than the old hierarchy the Council had always assumed was its right to maintain. The formal offer arrived on Earth with terms unlike anything the original petition had ever proposed. Earth would join the Council as a fully sovereign partner, maintaining complete control over its own fleet, infrastructure, and internal governance, while participating in Council trade, diplomacy, and mutual defense on terms negotiated as equals rather than dictated from above. It was, in every meaningful sense, the membership Earth had once dreamed of receiving, though shaped now by a year of hard-won independence that ensured it would never again be a relationship of dependence. Nathan Hale called a public session to announce the decision, standing before Earth's citizens with the same calm resolve he had carried throughout the entire difficult year. 6 years ago, he said, we were told we were not ready to sit among the stars as equals. 1 year ago, we decided to stop asking permission to be who we already were. Today, the Council has finally offered us what should have been ours from the beginning, not out of pity, not out of desperate need, but out of genuine respect, earned through everything we built when no one else believed we could. He paused, looking out over the crowd gathered before him, remembering every difficult decision that had led to this moment. The quiet withdrawal, the painful uncertainty, the crisis that had finally forced honest reckoning on both sides. I want to be clear about what we are accepting, he continued. We are not returning to the table we once begged to join. We built our own table, strong enough to stand entirely on its own. What we accept today is an invitation to bring that table forward, to sit alongside the Council as true equals, sharing what we have built freely, and receiving in turn genuine partnership rather than conditional tolerance. That is a very different thing than what we were denied 6 years ago, and it is worth celebrating precisely because of how hard-won it truly is. The announcement was met with widespread celebration across Earth, tempered by a quiet, hard-earned wisdom that came from having survived the uncertainty of true independence and emerged stronger for it. Grace Linford stood near the back of the gathered crowd, remembering every cold dismissal she had endured in that distant chamber, feeling, for the first time in longer than she could recall, a sense of closure rather than lingering frustration. Claire Whitfield returned to council space one final time in an official capacity, this time not as a desperate contractor seeking approval, but as the leader of Earth's delegation formally establishing the terms of partnership. She stood in the same chamber where Grace had once been coldly dismissed, now filled with delegates who greeted her with genuine warmth and respect, rather than polite indifference. Vantor Kale personally welcomed her, extending a formal gesture of apology that the council had never before offered any species in its long history. "We failed to see your worth until our own weakness forced us to," he said. "I hope, in time, we can build something that honors what should have existed between us from the very beginning." Claire accepted the apology with grace, though she made clear, gently but firmly, that Earth's future participation in council affairs would always be measured by mutual respect rather than convenient necessity. "We are not here because you need us," she said. "We are here because we choose to be, and that choice can be withdrawn, just as easily as it was given, should this council ever forget the lesson it so painfully learned." On Halden Reach, Ilona Marsk received official confirmation of the new partnership with quiet relief, knowing that her colony's future stability would no longer depend on the goodwill of an inconsistent council leadership, but on a genuine, structured relationship between two civilizations that had finally learned to respect each other honestly. She sent a personal message of gratitude to Claire Whitfield, thanking her not just for the emergency assistance that had saved her colony's harvest, but for demonstrating, through action rather than promises, exactly what true partnership could look like. Patrick Vaughn, now a fully confident senior technician on the gas giant station he had once inherited with such uncertainty, welcomed a new generation of local trainees, under the same collaborative framework Claire Whitfield had insisted upon during the original crisis repair, ensuring that no single civilization's departure would ever again leave a critical system vulnerable through simple lack of shared understanding. Oliver Bennett watched from Earth as the first joint training program between human and council engineers launched successfully, a program built not on Earth doing the work while others merely observed, but on genuine collaborative learning between equals. Exactly the kind of relationship he had once hoped for during his own long, isolated years of quiet service. Admiral Henry Voss maintained Earth's independent fleet even after formal membership was established, now coordinating occasionally with Council defense forces on matters of mutual interest, but never again subordinate to a command structure that had once taken Earth's contributions for granted. The fleet stood as a permanent symbol of the independence Earth had built during its year of withdrawal, a foundation strong enough to support genuine partnership rather than quiet dependence. Reska Dorn, reflecting on the long and difficult journey that had brought both civilizations to this new understanding, found herself thinking often about the lesson at the heart of everything that had happened. The Council had spent 6 years questioning whether humanity was ready for a seat among the stars, only to discover, through painful necessity, that humanity had never needed the Council's permission to become exactly the civilization it was always capable of being. The regret, when it finally came, had arrived too late to prevent the crisis, but not too late to build something better in its aftermath. Nathan Hale, standing once more at his office window overlooking a capital that had grown into quiet, confident maturity over the course of one transformative year, allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Earth had walked away from a table where it was never truly welcome, and in doing so, had built something far more valuable than membership ever could have provided on its own, an unshakable understanding of its own worth, earned not through anyone else's approval, but through its own quiet, determined strength. The stars ahead no longer represented a judgment to be earned. They represented a partnership, finally built on terms Earth itself had chosen, terms shaped by every difficult decision, every quiet sacrifice, and every hard lesson learned along the way. And as Earth's delegation took its rightful place among the Council for the first time as true equals, it did so not as a species finally granted permission to belong, but as a civilization that had already proven, beyond any doubt, that it belonged all along.